Okehazama had concluded. The impossible had materialized. Nobunaga's triumph wasn't merely a tactical accomplishment. It reshaped the entire course of Japanese history. The Imagawa family, once controllers of 3 entire provinces and possessors of Japan's mightiest military force, collapsed into weakness. During the subsequent years, rival clans systematically dismantled Imagawa holdings, dismantling a domain that had formerly dominated the nation. A family expected to control Japan was obliterated by one devastating strike. Nobunaga's standing, meanwhile, skyrocketed across the realm. Pre-Okehazama, he'd been dismissed as an obscure regional daimyo. Post-Okehazama, he was recognized as a strategic mastermind who demolished overwhelming opposition through pure military brilliance. Distinguished warriors pledged themselves to the Oda dynasty. Capital poured into Nobunaga's territories. New partnerships materialized. Yet the most consequential aftermath concerned a young officer, Matsudaira Motoyasu. He'd directed Yoshimoto's forward forces, assaulting Oda strongholds hours before the primary confrontation. The instant Yoshimoto perished, Motoyasu comprehended the situation's finality. Yoshimoto's family was doomed. His allegiance shifted directions. You'll recognize his subsequent identity, Tokugawa Ieyasu, history's figure who would transform into shogun and bring all Japan under singular governance. The partnership connecting Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu, crystallized following Okehazama, would profoundly influence Japan's trajectory for decades. Working collaboratively, they'd initiate the offensive resulting in Japan's political unification. Though Nobunaga never witnessed that unification's completion, his Okehazama victory supplied the strategic groundwork for accomplishing it. June 12, 1560. The day 2-0-0 warriors obliterated 25-0-0. The tempest that redirected a civilization's destiny. Victory through sheer numbers? No. Victory through superior equipment? No. Victory through overwhelming force? No. Victory via intelligence. Nobunaga perceived what Yoshimoto overlooked: the landscape, the meteorology, the human dimension. Potential where everyone else perceived only disaster. He possessed the willingness to gamble on that insight, despite the fact that any responsible commander would have withdrawn. Countless military engagements throughout history hinged on whoever commanded greater numbers, more weaponry, more wealth. Okehazama wasn't that kind of conflict. Okehazama turned on who possessed superior analysis, superior groundwork, superior rhythm, superior mastery of translating disadvantage into advantage. 25-0-0 troops defeated by 2-0-0. Not miraculous, not fortunate. Through reconnaissance, through weaponizing meteorological conditions, through surgical targeting, through flawless synchronization, through the audacity to execute a strategy that appeared deranged to onlookers. Nobunaga's genius resided not in battling 25-0 warriors. It was in avoiding direct battle with 25-0 warriors. It was comprehending that he didn't require total military victory. He required one opponent's elimination, and once that opponent fell, the whole structure crumbled automatically. The Okehazama principle: numbers don't determine outcome. Strategy determines it. Wealth doesn't guarantee success. Resourcefulness does. Power doesn't win alone. Intelligent force application wins. 1560. The year a 28-year-old warlord demonstrated that strategic thinking transcends superior numbers. The year a natural disaster transformed into a tactical instrument. The year Japan's historical trajectory redirected. When you encounter overwhelming obstacles, reflect on Okehazama. Acknowledge that triumph doesn't invariably favor the numerous, doesn't always belong to the powerful, frequently belongs to the perceptive. If you discovered this saga of strategic genius as gripping as narrating it was for me, follow this channel. We explore countless engagements where careful planning demolished raw aggression, where meticulous preparation surpassed overwhelming opposition, where visionary commanders transformed certain annihilation into extraordinary achievement. Activate notifications to receive every episode. Comment your perspective. Would you have commanded the assault through the storm as Nobunaga did, or postponed until conditions cleared? Thank you for engaging. until the next engagement. Video info. The Fourth Crusade, when faith became plunder. Discover how the Fourth Crusade, which was supposed to liberate Jerusalem, resulted in the fall of Constantinople and transformed the fate of medieval Europe. Channel info. Medieval history and Crusades. English. This video highlights one of the most dramatic moments in medieval history, the Fourth Crusade. The introduction captures your attention by revealing a stunning contradiction. The Crusaders set out supposedly on a sacred mission to liberate Jerusalem, yet they ended up destroying the greatest Christian city in the world. The story is compelling because it challenges everything we think we know about the Crusades, especially by exposing how Christians betrayed Christians for profit. To optimize for SEO, your title and description should include keywords like Fourth Crusade, Constantinople sacked, medieval history, and Christian betrayal. This helps reach audiences hungry for compelling, untold stories from history. The Crusaders had faith, courage, and the backing of the church. They could definitely raise the funds they needed. Or so they thought. Except they couldn't. When payment came due, the Crusaders couldn't even scrape together half what they owed. They were stuck in Venice broke, stranded, with no ships, no way to reach Jerusalem, and no escape route. That's when Enrico Dandolo, the Doge of Venice, had them exactly where he wanted them, trapped by debt. And he had a solution. Venice had enemies, two rival cities in the Adriatic, refusing to bow to Venetian power. Dandolo made a proposition: help Venice recapture Zara, a Christian city that had rebelled. In exchange, your debt gets restructured, not erased, just postponed, reworked, renegotiated. The Crusaders, desperate and out of options, agreed. It was the first sin. Christian soldiers attacking Christian cities. The Pope was outraged. He excommunicated the Venetians and condemned the Crusaders. But the machinery was already in motion. Dandolo had bigger plans than just Zara. During the siege of Zara, a young man appeared in the Crusader camp, Alexios Angelos, a Byzantine prince. His story was heartbreaking. His father, Emperor Isaac II, had been overthrown and blinded by his own brother, Alexios III. The young Alexios escaped and was now seeking revenge. But more importantly, he needed an army. And he had an offer that was almost too good to be true. Help him take back the throne of Constantinople, he said. And he'd pay the Crusaders 200 Wazn gold marks, roughly 3 million today. More than twice what they owed Venice. Plus, he'd provide 10 Wazn soldiers for their crusade to Jerusalem. And most importantly, he'd place the Orthodox Church under the Pope's authority in Rome. It seemed perfect. Almost suspiciously perfect. Dandolo saw it. The Crusader leaders saw it. But 200 Wazn gold marks? That was worth any risk. Enough to pay off Venice. Enough to fund the entire crusade to the Holy Land. Enough to make any man break his sacred oath. Constantinople wasn't just another city. It was the city Christendom's greatest prize. The Byzantine Empire's capital since 330 AD. Rome's spiritual heir. 9 centuries of accumulated riches. Treasures taken from vanquished empires. Sacred relics shipped from across Christian Europe. Ancient manuscripts. Gold, silver, jewels, priceless artwork. It was the wealthiest city medieval Europe had ever known. And it was protected by the Theodosian walls, the legendary walls that had stood for 800 years. A 3-layered fortress that had turned back the Huns, Persians, and Arabs. Everyone who'd tried to breach them had failed. The walls were thought to be unbreakable, a monument to Roman engineering that no land army could overcome. But the Crusaders had an advantage the city's defenders hadn't anticipated. They weren't attacking by land alone. They had Venice's fleet, over 100 warships. They had access to the Golden Horn, a natural inlet that cut into the city's heart and weakened the landward fortifications. And they had something no previous army had ever brought to a siege. Siege towers mounted on ships, a Venetian invention that would revolutionize warfare. Still, attacking Constantinople seemed reckless. It was the Christian world's largest and richest city. The Pope himself had forbidden any assault on Christian lands. The Byzantine Empire, despite its internal chaos, still had enormous military resources, a chain of fortresses, and centuries of military tradition. But the Crusaders' minds weren't on Jerusalem anymore. They weren't thinking about faith. They were thinking about gold, about 200,000 gold marks, about Alexios's promise. They were trapped by debt to Venice, manipulated by circumstance, justified by a questionable claimant. Dandolo had set the perfect trap. The Crusaders believed they were making a business arrangement. What they really were, a weapon aimed at the heart of Eastern Christendom. And Venice? Venice was about to become the Mediterranean's greatest naval power. All they needed was for the Crusaders to do the heavy lifting. In the spring of 1203, the fleet departed Zara. Over 100 Venetian ships, thousands of French, Flemish, and German knights, a young prince with promises of gold. Destination: Constantinople. Official mission: restore the rightful emperor. Actual goal: 9 centuries of accumulated treasure ripe for the taking. As the armada crossed the Aegean, the Crusaders must have wrestled with what they were about to do. They'd left home to liberate Jerusalem. Now they sailed toward the Christian world's greatest city. They'd sworn sacred oaths to defend Christendom. Now they were about to besiege its heart. But the debt loomed real. The promise of 200,000 gold marks was real. And while the Theodosian walls had held for 800 years, even legends could fall. The Crusaders had one crucial advantage: Venice. And Venice had a strategy. One built on naval dominance, cutting-edge technology, and exploiting weaknesses Constantinople's defenders didn't even know existed. Those siege towers on ships weren't just a novelty or an experiment. They were revolutionary. They allowed attackers to strike the walls from the Golden Horn, where the defenses were thinner, where no one expected a real naval assault. When the Crusader fleet arrived off Constantinople's coast in June 1203, the city was unprepared. Emperor Alexios III had let the navy fall into disrepair. The naval defenses were in chaos. The Byzantine army was spread thin across multiple borders. Constantinople was rich and strong on paper, but it had a fatal vulnerability. The Crusaders issued their demands: restore Emperor Isaac II to power, crown young Alexios as co-emperor, and pay 200,000 gold marks. Alexios III's answer was immediate. No. The walls are impregnable, he believed. The army is strong. The Crusaders are just another failed invasion attempt. But Alexios III fundamentally misunderstood his enemy. These weren't ordinary invaders. They were men trapped by crushing debt. Men used as pawns by Venice. Men who'd abandoned their original goal and had no way out except forward. Behind them stood Enrico Dandolo, a 90-year-old mastermind who'd orchestrated this entire trap with surgical precision. The Crusaders were bound by debt, legitimized by a pretender. And now they faced an impossible task: storm the world's most heavily fortified city. Walls that had stood for 8 centuries. But they had advantages: Venice's fleet, revolutionary naval technology, and the tantalizing prospect of 9 centuries of accumulated wealth on the far side of those walls. The siege would begin soon. What happened next would reshape military strategy forever. Because when debt, political scheming, and technological superiority converge, even the most legendary walls become vulnerable. The real question wasn't whether Constantinople would fall. It was how quickly, and what would remain. The Theodosian walls were far more than mere fortifications. They were a statement carved in stone. 800 years of architectural dominance built to defy every army that dared challenge them. 3 layers of walls, deep moats, watchtowers positioned for maximum firepower. They'd crushed the Huns, defeated Arab and Bulgarian invasions, and survived months of relentless siege. Entire armies had shattered against them. But in June 1203, as the Crusader fleet approached Constantinople's waters, these walls confronted something unprecedented. Not just another desperate army, but an alliance between cash-starved French knights and the Mediterranean's supreme naval power. And Venice didn't play by the rulebook. Enrico Dandolo was 90. Most men his age were settling their estates. Dandolo was commanding an armada. He was the strategist who'd transformed a swamp into a commercial empire. Standing on his ship's deck, gazing at Constantinople, he saw what Byzantine planners had missed. Not impregnable ramparts. He saw blind spots. Ancient, legendary defenses create a dangerous illusion: complacency. Constantine's builders had focused on the landward walls, the obvious threat. The Golden Horn's water-facing defenses were considerably thinner. No one in history had launched a serious naval assault from there. The currents were treacherous, winds unpredictable. Attacking from rocking ships seemed suicidally stupid. Venice begged to differ, and it had over 100 warships to prove its point. Venice's naval dominance wasn't just superior numbers, it was engineering. Centuries of sea knowledge translated into ships that could maneuver where others would founder. Captains who understood currents like mapmakers read terrain. An entire civilization built on maritime mastery. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire had spread its resources thin across land frontiers, neglecting the navy. Venice had done the opposite. Every gold coin spent on ships, every naval breakthrough tested, every captain trained to perfection. Now that accumulated maritime expertise faced its defining moment. But ships couldn't win alone. Walls were walls. You couldn't simply sail against them and expect victory. You needed height. You needed to reach the wall-top defenders. You needed to turn ships into siege weapons. That's where genius struck. Siege towers mounted directly on ships, not crude platforms, but engineered marvels designed for unstable, moving decks. Reinforced timber to handle the sea's motion. Retractable bridges that extended from tower to wall top. Crews trained to row and fight simultaneously. It merged medieval siege tactics with naval superiority on a scale never attempted. The Byzantines had no answer. Their naval defenses were in shambles. Emperor Alexios III had scattered the fleet across other regions. The remaining Byzantine ships were undermanned, outdated, and vastly outnumbered. Dandelo's assault plan was a masterpiece of coordination. It maximized every advantage Venice had. Attack wouldn't come from one point. It would be a pincer move. Crusader land forces would hammer the walls from outside, forcing Byzantine defenders to spread thin. Simultaneously, the Venetian fleet would strike from the Golden Horn's weak point, using ship-mounted siege towers to breach the thinner defenses. It was strategy as art form, demanding perfect communication, split-second timing, zero margin for error. One miscalculation meant total collapse. But success meant something unprecedented. The Theodosian walls, unbreached for 800 years, would finally fall. July 1203 came. The Crusader land forces established siege positions outside the walls. Catapults were raised, troops assembled. Steel clanged as French and Flemish knights prepared for what might be a brutal, months-long slog. Dandolo had other plans. He was thinking in days, not months. The Venetian fleet entered the Golden Horn like a precision instrument. Over 100 ships, positioned with mathematical exactness. Siege towers rose above the waterline, their bridges ready to deploy. Rowers steadied the vessels against the current. Soldiers gripped their weapons and locked eyes on the walls above. Byzantine defenders on the ramparts watched the approaching fleet and experienced something between shock and dread. Ships couldn't fight like this. Ships couldn't reach the walls. Yet the siege towers rising from the water weren't hypothetical. They were advancing undeniable reality. When the first bridges extended to touch the ramparts, theory became brutal fact. Venetian soldiers charged across the bridges, meeting Byzantine defenders in desperate hand-to-hand fighting atop the fortifications. It wasn't a desperate human wave. It was a calculated assault at multiple positions, each ship tower creating a fresh foothold. Byzantine defenders, torn between the external land siege and the naval assault, couldn't mass enough soldiers anywhere. The Blachernae Palace sector, the weakest point, began to crumble. The breach came methodically, not dramatically. Wall section by wall section, position by position, the Venetians advanced. Inside the city's perimeter, individual fortifications mattered more than overall numbers. Crusaders and Venetians poured through the broken walls. Inside the city that was supposedly impregnable, Emperor Alexios III saw the walls fall and made the obvious choice for a gutless ruler: escape. He emptied the treasury he could reach and fled into darkness, abandoning Constantinople. The first siege phase ended not with the city's utter destruction, but with a political rearrangement. Isaac II, the deposed emperor the Crusaders promised to restore, emerged from prison and reclaimed his throne. Young Alexios Angelus joined him as co-emperor. The same Alexios who'd promised 200 Voisin gold marks now wore the crown. The Crusaders had upheld their bargain. They'd captured the city. They'd put Alexios in power. Now they expected payment. 200 Wauizorn gold marks, roughly equivalent to 100 million today, enough to clear their Venice debt and fund their original Egypt expedition. Except there was a fundamental problem. Alexios IV didn't have that money. He'd made his promises from exile without grasping Byzantine financial reality. The treasury was already empty. Alexios III had stripped it on his way out, and extracting 200,000 gold marks from already resentful citizens while foreign soldiers camped outside was politically impossible. Alexios IV made an effort anyway. Taxes rose, church property was seized, sacred objects were melted into coins. Each action eroded his popularity more. Every week without full payment pushed the Crusaders closer to explosion. Venice, their creditor, showed patience. Dandolo wouldn't accept less than his due. The French and Flemish Crusaders, their exit blocked by debt, grew increasingly volatile. Tensions simmered. Fighting erupted sporadically. Resentment poisoned relations. Then, January 1204 brought catastrophe. An imperial coup toppled Alexios IV. He was imprisoned, then executed. A palace aristocrat named Alexios V claimed the throne. His first declaration was absolute. No payment to the Crusaders, no further Western occupation. Constantinople was now off limits. All negotiations ceased. The Crusaders felt completely betrayed. They'd captured the city once, placed their man on the throne, waited months for payment. Now he was dead, and his replacement rejected everything. The political cover had disintegrated. Their puppet was gone. No legitimacy remained. Yet the Crusaders remained under debt to Venice. They still needed resources. Yet Constantinople, even without a compliant emperor, still contained 9 centuries of riches. If Alexios wouldn't pay voluntarily, maybe the Crusaders would help themselves. Dandolo recognized the opening. The first conquest had been political, installing a puppet. The second conquest could be financial, wholesale plunder. This time without restraint, without preserving the city for an ally. The Crusaders voted. No retreat, no further negotiation. Another assault. And when the walls fell this time, Constantinople would be sacked. April 1204 approached. The Venetian fleet, never truly leaving the Golden Horn, made ready. Siege towers were refitted, reinforced. Crusader land forces took new positions. Byzantine defenders under Alexios V prepared to hold a city already defeated once. But this was fundamentally different. The first siege had been political: crown a claimant, collect a debt. The second would be about pure survival. Crusaders backed into a corner by debt with only one remaining path: through the walls. And beyond those walls, the world's richest city. 9 centuries of accumulated treasure, sacred relics, ancient manuscripts, gold, silver, jewels, waiting. The Crusaders had captured Constantinople once for a claimant. Betrayed and unpaid, they'd seize it again. This time not for politics, for plunder. What came next was 9 centuries of accumulated wealth systematically stripped away. The Byzantine Empire would emerge broken, never to recover. The second assault on Constantinople opened in April 1204. Fundamentally different from before. No puppet to crown. No political excuse. No promise of compensation. The Crusaders and Venetians faced debt, betrayal from a dead emperor, and a new ruler determined to deny everything. One option remained: force through the walls. The Venetian fleet re-entered the Golden Horn. Siege towers, proven effective in July 1203, were rebuilt and repositioned. Crusader forces lined up once more against the Theodosian walls. This wasn't conquest to install an ally. This was conquest for survival, to forcibly extract what Alexios IV promised and Alexios V refused. Alexios V knew the stakes. Previous constraints had vanished. The Crusaders no longer needed the city preserved for an allied ruler. If they broke through now, they'd show no mercy. Looting would follow. The assault pattern repeated. Venetian ships carrying siege towers moved straight to the walls. Bridges dropped. Soldiers poured across into desperate fortress-top combat. Simultaneously, Crusaders struck multiple wall sections. Same coordinated strategy. Attack from multiple angles, split the defense, overwhelmed through coordination rather than brute force. Again, the Blachernae Palace sector, already discovered as weak, collapsed. Without diplomatic pressure to negotiate, without the need to preserve the city intact, this breach came savagely, decisively. Walls shattered. Alexios V witnessed the Crusaders entering the city and repeated his predecessor's move. Flee. Take what could be grabbed. Abandon the city, the empire, any defense. The 800-year walls fell a second time in 12 months. This time without puppet coronations or political theater. Only Crusader and Venetian soldiers, furious from months of waiting, enraged by shattered promises, unleashed to seize what they believed was rightfully theirs. What followed was systematic large-scale plunder of the Christian world's richest city. 9 centuries as the Byzantine capital meant 9 centuries of accumulated treasures. Imperial heirlooms, Christian relics collected from across Christendom. Classical manuscripts dating to antiquity. Gold, silver, gemstones, sacred liturgical objects, artworks spanning centuries of Eastern Christian civilization. All now behind breached walls. The Crusaders advanced methodically. No random frenzy. This was organized plunder. Churches fell. Hagia Sophia, Christendom's supreme cathedral, was ransacked. Sacred objects were melted for gold. Manuscript covers were torn away for their jewels. Icons were ripped from the walls. The high altar was desecrated as soldiers hunted hidden precious metals. Imperial residences were emptied. Byzantine treasures accumulated across centuries vanished into the packs of French, Flemish, German Crusaders and Venetian soldiers. Entire collections of manuscripts were destroyed. Not for any lack of value to the books themselves, most fighters couldn't read, but because bindings contained gold, silver, and gemstones. The contents were irrelevant. What mattered was what could be melted, pawned, and exported west. Eastern Christian relics, the holiest objects in their faith, were systematically plundered. Fragments of the true cross, or what Byzantines believed were fragments, were taken. St. John the Baptist's skull, one of Constantinople's supreme relics, vanished later, turning up in Western cathedrals.